I told you at the end of the last episode that 100 is where the company truly stops feeling like yours in the way that it once did. And I want to be honest with you about what I meant by that, because that line lands differently depending on where you are right now. If you're at 60 or 70 employees, it probably sounds like a warning. If you're already at 95 or 100 employees, you may have already felt it. That disorienting moment where you realize the business is running on something way bigger than you now. And you're not sure whether that's exactly what you wanted or something you weren't ready for. And actually, both of those things can be true at the exact same time. This is the final episode in the What Breaks series. We've covered 15, 25, 50, and 75. The first 3 stages had a list. They had breaking points, and every breaking point had an origin story in the stage before it. 75 brought a question. Provided you had done everything right in the stages before it, nothing breaks at 75, and the same is true for 100 employees. At 100 employees, there is no list. What happens at 100 is not a break, it's a becoming. And whether that becoming works for you or against you depends almost entirely on decisions you made in the stages before this one. Let me start with what 100 employees represent structurally, because I think most founders underestimate the organizational complexity they're now inside of. At 100 people, you likely have 3 layers between you and the person actually doing the work. You have individual contributors reporting to managers, managers reporting to directors or VPs, directors reporting to a C-suite, and a C-suite reporting to you, at least 3 layers. That starts to feel less like a small business and starts to feel more like an organization. And organizations operate by different rules than small businesses do. In a small business, the founder's instincts, their energy, their relationships, and judgment are the operating system. The business runs on you as the founder. At 100 employees, that is no longer possible. And if you're still trying to make it work that way, the business is paying for it in ways you probably can't fully see yet. So what actually changes at 100? There are 4 things, and none of them are new problems. We've talked about these before. They are the final forms of everything that was either built or avoided at 15, 25, 50, and 75 employees. Shift 1 is that culture is no longer transmittable by you. At 8 employees, culture was you. Your energy in the morning set the energy for the day. How you responded to a mistake, how you celebrated a win, how you talked about a client when they weren't in the room. Your team absorbed all of it because they were always near you. At 25, I told you that stopped working and employee experience had to become intentional. Behaviorally defined, even operationalized into how you hire, onboard, and manage performance. At 50, I told you that undefined culture hardens into subcultures, teams operating on completely different norms under the same roof inside the same organization. And at 100, if that foundation was built, culture transmits through your systems, your managers, and your documented behavioral standards. It runs without you because it was designed to. That is the payoff for the work you did way earlier. If that foundation was not built, what you have at 100 is not your culture. It is an accumulation of individual management styles, informal norms, and inherited habits from every person who was ever in a leadership role in your company. Some of it reflects you and a lot of it doesn't. And sometimes you cannot feel the difference anymore. You are too far from the work. You will not know which version you have until something surfaces it, like an exit interview, a harassment claim, a high performer who leaves without warning and says something on the way out that absolutely shocks you. At 100 employees, you are no longer the cultural transition mechanism. Your managers are. Your systems are. Your documented behavioral expectations, they are. If those things don't exist or aren't enforced, the culture you think you have and the culture your employees are actually experiencing, which is why I call it employee experience, are probably two very different things. Shift 2 is that the founder becomes a brand asset, not an operator. So this is the shift that most founders resist the longest, and it is the one that costs the most when they do. At 75 employees, I talked about the founder identity crossroads, this visionary versus operator, and the honest question of what role do you, the founder, actually want to play going forward? At 100 employees, that question has been answered. If not directly by you, then by the business. A 100-person company needs an operator running it day to day. Someone who is energized by systems, by layers, by complexity, and by organizational architecture. If that person is you and you've done the work to become a true CEO at scale, the business reflects that. If it isn't you and you haven't made room for someone who is an operator, the business reflects that too. Usually in growth that plateaus or decisions that move too slow, and definitely in leaders who are waiting for permission they never get. Here is what I see with our clients at 100 employees when this is working well, when they have given the operation over to somebody who is an operator. The founder's highest leverage role is external. They are focused on investor relationships. They are focused on strategic partnerships. They are focused on key client relationships, market positioning. They focus on talent attraction at the senior level. They are the face of the company in places that matter most for whatever comes next. Internal operations then are being run by someone else, a COO, a president, not because the founder was pushed out, but because the founder made a deliberate choice about where their presence actually creates the most value. And they decided that it's no longer inside the daily operations of a 100-person organization. When this is not working, when the founder has not made that decision and they are still the de facto COO, they're still in the details, still the one people go to when they can't get a decision made elsewhere, they're still the bottleneck. It's just a dramatically more expensive organization than they were at 15. There's also a structural consequence to this that goes way beyond growth. A company where the founder is still the operating center cannot be acquired cleanly. They cannot survive a full health event. I've seen them not be able to attract serious leadership teams because serious leaders do not join organizations where the founders will override everything they try to do. The founder's inability or unwillingness to step into the brand asset role is not just a growth ceiling. It is a business continuity risk. Shift 3 is that middle management is now the company. At 100 employees, there is a layer in your organization that most founders have never invested meaningfully in. This is a soapbox of mine. It is the director level, senior managers, even frontline managers, the people who sit between your C-suite and your individual contributors. This layer is where strategy either gets executed or it absolutely does not. It is where culture or employee experience gets enforced or completely ignored. It is where your best people decide to stay or leave. At 25, I told you that lack of leadership capability multiplies risk, that your employees have a fundamentally different experience of working at your company depending on who they report to. That was about first line managers, frontline managers. At 100, that same dynamic exists one layer up, and it has been compounding since 25 employees. A director who was promoted because they were a great manager, but was never developed as a leader, is now responsible for multiple teams, multiple managers, and significant organizational complexity. If they haven't been given the frameworks, the expectations, and the actual development to operate at that level, they are managing by instinct. And managing by instinct at director level inside a 100-person firm creates damage that takes years to unwind. The founders who navigate 100 well have usually done two things at this layer. They have defined what director level leadership actually looks like in their organization. Not just like what results are expected, everybody does that, but how decisions get made, how conflict gets managed, how development happens for the people below them. And they have invested in developing those leaders rather than just holding them accountable for outcomes, especially outcomes they were never trained to produce. This is my area of expertise. It's where I spend my time. And I can tell you that most businesses, even ones much larger, never invest in this. And at 100, the consequences of that can be devastating. They are the reason your best individual contributors are leaving or staying and not really living up to expectations. They are the reason initiatives stall between the C-suite and execution. They are the reason your employee experience feels different in different parts of the building. Shift 4 is that governance and decision rights must professionalize. The last shift, this last one, is the most structural and the one that sounds the least urgent until it suddenly becomes the most urgent. At 100 employees, informal decision-making is a liability. In a small business, decisions get made in hallways, in Slack threads, in one-on-ones with the founder. Everyone knows who has authority over what, mostly because there aren't that many people and the founder is in most of the conversations. At 100, that doesn't work. Decisions get made in rooms where the wrong people are present and the right people aren't. Leaders who were never given clear authority over their function, either underreach, constantly escalating decisions that should be theirs, or they overreach, making calls that create conflict with peers and confusion below them. Ambiguity around authority at this scale, at 100 employees, does not just slow things down, it creates political dysfunction. It creates leaders who stop making decisions because they've learned the decisions will get relitigated anyway. It creates a founder who is pulled back into operational details they should have been out of 2 stages ago. What this requires is not complicated, but it is deliberate. Decision rights documented and shared. Clear, very clear frameworks for what goes to a functional leader versus a C-suite leader versus the founder or CEO president. A leadership operating system where there are regular rhythms, clear accountability, documented ownership. I know it sounds corporate, but it absolutely is imperative at this stage. This is what governance means at this scale. not a board in the formal sense, though you certainly may have that too at this point. The internal architecture of how authority is held and exercised across a 100-person organization. If that architecture doesn't exist, you don't have an organization. You have a founder with 100 people waiting for direction. I said at the beginning that 100 is a becoming, not a breaking. Here is what I mean by that. Every stage before this, 15, 25, 50, 75 employees, was about building infrastructure, building systems, building leaders, building culture, and the organizational capacity to hold more complexity than you currently had. At 100, you find out what you built. Founders who did the work at the earlier stages arrive at 100 with options. The culture runs because it was designed to. The leadership team operates because it was developed. The systems hold because they were built for scale, not retrofitted in a crisis. The founder can choose what role they play because the organization doesn't collapse if they step back from the operations. Founders who didn't do that work, who built reactively, who promoted people without developing them, who defined culture as values on a wall, who treated HR as an administrative function instead of a growth strategy, they arrive at 100 fighting the same fires they were fighting at 50, just with a larger and more expensive organization around them. And they do it with a significant less ability to personally fix what's broken. The difference between those two founders is not intelligence. It's not resources. It is not even timing, really. It is intentionality. The decision at every stage to build for where you are going rather than react to where you are now. This is the final episode in the What Breaks series, and I want to be direct with you about why it ends here. Beyond 100 employees, the challenges get genuinely specialized. Now we could be talking about M&A strategies. We could talk about equity structures, formal board governance, enterprise sales cycles, institutional investors. Those are real and important topics, but they are a different show. What this series was built to do was give you the human infrastructure underneath all of that, the foundation that makes everything else from here possible. What comes next on this channel is the Fix series. We're going to take every breaking point we named, onboarding, employee experience, leadership development, communication architecture, compensation systems, governance, and we're going to go deep on how to actually build them. Not theory, not frameworks you have to translate into action yourself, the actual mechanics. What it looks like, how to do it, what order to do it in, what it costs when you don't. If you are not already subscribed, please do so that you do not miss that, because the diagnostic work is done. Now we build. Most founders build reactively. They focus on sales, marketing, and product, and they treat people as an afterthought until the people start costing them everything. A business where people building is intentional, where leadership is developed at every layer, not just at the top, where HR is treated as a growth strategy, not a compliance function, where the founder's role evolves as the company demands it, not because someone forced them out, but because they built something strong enough to run without them in the room. That is a business that scales. Let's build that.